Avi Melamed, he's a former Israeli intelligence official and the founder of Inside the Middle East. Thank you so much for making time for us, Avi. Now, the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, he has defended this plan to go in to take over Gaza City, telling the press that there's two objectives. They're going to attack two strongholds and do this fairly quickly. What do you make of this plan?
Well, Eli, thank you for having me. That plan refers, roughly speaking, to the remaining of Hamas military power. We're looking at, roughly speaking, some two major forces of Hamas left out of 5 or 6 major frames that Hamas had prior to October 7. They are mostly located in some areas in Gaza Strip, particularly Gaza City, the major urban area in Gaza Strip, and then some of the camps in the western parts of Gaza Strip, and the outskirts of Gaza City. So these are the places Mr. Netanyahu refers to, roughly speaking.
And what do you think? Is that an achievable goal considering the conditions?
Well, it depends how do you define the objectives, but I think it's very clear that the army, at least, made it very clear to the Israeli government that in the end of the day, we have to be very realistic in setting the objectives. Hamas is not going to disappear. It's going to maintain and preserve some sort of military capacity. I think that in the end of the day, the major issue in the context of Hamas, which I believe everyone in the region and outside of the region agrees, is that Hamas cannot any longer continue and dictate its radical agenda as it has been doing, unfortunately, for the last 40 years, basically negatively impacting both the trajectory of Palestinians as well as Israelis.
You know, in the press conference, the Prime Minister Netanyahu, he talked about he wants to get all the hostages, all 20 hostages home. He doesn't want to do it piecemeal, doesn't want to negotiate. But as you mentioned, the military, I mean, Israeli officials, the military chief, Eyal Zamir, I mean, they are pushing back on the idea of this aggressive campaign and saying that it could endanger the hostages. How significant is it that we are seeing Netanyahu's own military telling him that this plan may not be ideal and could actually harm the hostages he says he wants home?
Well, Eli, it's very significant because in the end of the day, the chief of staff of the IDF is presenting the government the different ramifications of the different scenarios. The government, in the end of the day, is the one taking decisions and order the army. But it's a very sincere and very reasonable, and I would even say serious concern that indeed it's going to jeopardize the life of the hostages, the remaining of the hostages in Gaza Strip. We are looking totally at 50 hostages. It is estimated that out of those 50, 20 are still alive. And there is a very serious concern that the expansion of the Israeli military move might jeopardize their well-being.
Avi, we're speaking to you. You're in Tel Aviv right now. We're seeing the massive protests coming from the hostage families. I've read there's even talk of a general strike. So talk to me about what you're hearing and seeing on the street as Netanyahu holds this press conference with the world's media saying he's going forward.
Well, Eli, since day one, there has been a growing sentiment within Israeli public opinion demanding to move forward to a deal that will bring back all the hostages. We have to understand this is something very significant for Israelis and Israeli ethos, that we have to bring back our people back home. And I think that I would accurately reflect if I would say that overwhelmingly most of the Israelis are supporting end of the military move and moving towards a concluding of a deal that will bring back hostages back home. Obviously, as you can understand, following the recent Israeli government decision, there is an increasing, I would say, roar up, crying within Israeli public opinion that actually is enormously disturbed with the scenario, as we have just discussed, presented by the chief of staff, that an Israeli expansion of the war in Gaza Strip could result in jeopardizing the life of the remaining of the hostages in Gaza Strip.
Avi, you talk about the goal from Netanyahu is erasing Hamas, but going into Gaza City, a city with over 1 million civilians, what then falls to the Israeli military? Are they now responsible for the people that are still in the city?
The bottom line is that if there is going to be an expansion of the military move, the bottom line is yes, the Israeli IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces will have to take responsibility, not only fighting the power of Hamas in Gaza Strip and the outskirts of Gaza City, but also particularly taking care of the hundreds of thousands of Gaza civilians that will have to evacuate Gaza City to a safe, relatively speaking, areas outside of Gaza City. I think that we have to emphasize something very significant. Hamas is not going to disappear. I think that all these slogans or the rhetoric about eliminating Hamas are not really reflecting, I would say, a rational assessment of the outcome of this whole situation. I think that the major objective in the end of the day, and I think that this is an objective that across the board, not only in Israel, but regionally and globally, the major objective is to make sure that Hamas will not be able to continue and to dictate its radical agenda as it was able to do, unfortunately, so far. There is a big question that goes back in the end of the day, and that has to do with the inner Palestinian arena in the sense of like, what's going to be the trajectory of the Palestinian inner political system vis-a-vis the role of Hamas and its role in shaping the future of the Palestinians in the future, the trajectory ahead. At this point, I must say, it's an open question.
So what you're suggesting is that perhaps Netanyahu's true goal is not necessarily eradicating Hamas, but really weakening it and pushing it back. And I imagine then, like, what is the beginning of this campaign going to look like? This could be very challenging in close quarters in a densely packed city.
Well, if I'm trying to get to Mr. Netanyahu's shoes, I would say that Mr. Netanyahu has to navigate between two major components, I would say, that basically guides its decisions onwards since day one of this war. One is the component that basically, rightly so, views Hamas and the continuation of the situation where Hamas continued to rule Gaza Strip and presents an enormous danger to the state of Israel, viewing that as an unacceptable and has to be changed from its core. The second thing is the inner political frame that Mr. Netanyahu has to navigate within. Basically, the current Israeli government is dominated by mostly ultra-national right-wing components that basically put a lot of pressure on Hamas and, in a way, on Mr. Netanyahu, and basically threatens to disassemble the government if Netanyahu is not going to continue the war. And the third thing that I think Mr. Netanyahu is constantly consumed with, it is legacy, looking forward, how is going to be remembered in the history and the records of the state of Israel and the Jewish people. I think these are the three major elements that Netanyahu is constantly trying to navigate from one element to another, which in the end of the day results in, according to some critics in Israel, a non-comprehensive and non-cohesive policy towards this whole crisis in Gaza Strip. Hence, partially, the growing criticism on Mr. Netanyahu within large sectors in Israel.
Amazing that legacy is even a factor, given all the challenges that remain. Thank you so much for joining us. That is Avi Melamed. He's a former Israeli intelligence official.